All right, y'all. So we just watched the video twice, and you were asked to pull out ethos, pathos, and logos. Obviously, like I said, that Professor X Xavier, I've worked with for 2 years and is a close friend. So I want you to think about first, though, the ethos of it. So think about the credibility of his story from him, with everything from words he did say to things he didn't say, to people and groups that he discussed, but not maybe by name, even down to body language. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and let y'all share out what you took notes on regarding that, or maybe what I just helped jog your memory think about with ethos.
He gave credibility to like his teachers and mentors who basically, showed him and encouraged him that he could be something despite everything that he's been through.
Exactly. That day when we were doing the photo shoot I was telling y'all about and recording the video, he was telling me actually he had a mentor who was like a professor that he really admired and learned a lot from, who actually, I can't remember the exact scientific term, but he found this like cell strain or something very specific. And he thought so much of Xavier as well. So like sometimes you make an impact on someone else, but you don't realize you also made such an impact on them, even as their student or someone, right, that was below them. So he asked Xavier, and I had seen it on his Instagram one time. I was like, oh, tell me about that picture that you got like a professional drawn photo done. And he was like, oh yeah, that's my mentor. He's writing a book one day and he wanted me to be in it, but he wanted an actual hand-drawn image of me. So think about how much you have to mean to somebody to get a hand-drawn image of them, right? I think sometimes we even take photos not as seriously anymore. We take selfies, all the time, or just take like live videos and stuff. And that helps, right, in the Black community when we're talking about all this stuff about justice and injustice. Otherwise, we would have never seen any kind of global movement for George Floyd, which I hope and pray now is going to happen for Breonna Taylor as well. But I have questions because of obvious how disrespected they're treating Black women in the community. But still, he told me when I asked him about that the guy paid like $800 or $900 to get a real hand-drawn thing done of him. And just think of that, the credibility that he has from his professor. So not only do they have credibility, and he thinks a lot of his mentors, but they think that much of him too. And I think that much of you all. And that's why I'm asking y'all all the time to speak your truth and to really have confidence in yourself, because you are all worthy, even if the world doesn't often show you that. Okay, so now we're going to go to, let's see, somebody else talk about what you thought was credible, honest, and really brought forth ethos from his speech.
I feel like when he, when he got done telling the story of Ezel, and he was like, if you not have already figured out, I'm Ezel. I feel like that brought a lot of credibility to his, the story that he was trying to get us to see. And it let us know, well, he's made it this far, so can we, with all of our, past traumas and hurt. So I feel like that brought a lot of credibility to his story, owning up to be Ezel.
Mm-hmm. I really like that you were talking about all of our past traumas and struggles, because I think that is what he always hones in on. So like, you can have trauma, you can have struggle, and some people, that's where it stops, right? They're like, that took me out, like that's it. But for him, he's like, no, I'm going to be a representative for my community. I'm going to keep pushing forward for myself, even though I'm still continuing, right, to maybe battle stuff. And we'll talk more about that in the logo section. Like, right, even though now he's like successful, every day is still not perfect, right? And I'm testimony to that right with him, because I was right across the hall from him with students. Every day is not going to be perfect, right? Kids are going to act out oftentimes because of their own trauma, but they can see themselves in him. He didn't say that, right? But he is like representation for the Black community, right? Specifically for Black children, specifically for Black men. So that is what I want y'all to think about now. We've been talking a lot about representation, both earlier when we were talking about on TV, right? That's not what Black people asked for when they were protesting. They want an end to police brutality. But also there does need to be more representation of Black people just in everything, right? So think about that in terms of Black men. We know obviously Black women and women of color are horrifically discriminated against, lowest on the totem pole, but Black men also, they are expected to be strong, they're expected to be successful, they're expected to be like the breadwinners. And not only that, but thinking about the stigma that goes with mental health. And like, think about Kanye right now. Or in terms of if a black man is in the LGBTQ community, how they're discriminated against, or if, you know, a trans black woman. So now think about that, of what he could have also not discussed, that brings credibility, ethos to him, because of how he could have been considered weak in the black community, or, you know, might not have wanted to share that in front of like his black male friends or family members. What is something else that he talked about that brings him great ethos or credibility and vulnerability?
Was it when he said about his brother, how he passed away,
Well, he did
that he
talk about
didn't
his
want to really
brother,
discuss
like
it
his
because
brother's brother, the sister, the uncle, but what else did he talk about that could be very vulnerable that he could have left out entirely?
The fact that he dealt with sexual abuse and domestic violence and how he went with no meals at a time.
Exactly, right. I think there's this idea of like men in general, but I think I've seen it more teaching and being friends with black males. Like, you have to be hard all the time. You have to be like a strong, and if you're not, then you're considered weak. So imagine what goes through a black male's mind, thinking like, I'm about to tell that I was abused in multiple ways, right? And think about how that brings him great ethos, credibility. Jordan, I want to hear from you specifically on this. What do you think in terms of his ethos, credibility, and what we've been talking about masculinity and the ideas around it in society, specifically for black males?
Yeah, most black males don't like to talk about like what's happened to them in the past. They just want to like keep a good face, I should say. Like, I don't know, like a strong, bold face, so they won't think people like think they're weak, stuff like that.
Yeah, so that definitely brings him credibility, right? The fact that he's like, no, I'm going to talk about this. This is my testimony. This is what I've grown through, what I continue to struggle through, and I'm going to help other people as well. Okay, so now that takes us kind of organically to the next section, which is logos. So for logos, I know usually when you're doing logos, if you're reading an article or if you're doing research, you think about the statistics, right? The math, the science, the facts. But he didn't talk about numbers, right? And he didn't necessarily talk about science, other than the fact that he is a STEM teacher. He was science and now he's math. But you want to think logos, logic, knowledge. What knowledge has he brought to literally endure or survive, to go through his logical sequence of like his journey, right? So at the very beginning, what did he say, like his childhood? We just talked about it briefly, but what did he say at the very beginning he was going through?
He said he knows all too well about the reality of sexual abuse, neglect, and he ate cold cuts and foods out of cans.
Right. So going through horrific trauma with emotional sexual abuse, and then literally like not knowing where you're going to get your next meal, starvation. So going through all of that, thinking logically, you have to, I'm sure, grow up so quickly as a child and have to think about, what do I need to do? Who do I need to avoid? How am I going to get food, right? For survival of the fittest mode. And thinking like having to like grow up like that, then you are going to have to develop everything quicker, your logic, your street skills, everything, like to get you to survive life. And so in doing that, then the next path, he survived, right? He made it through high school. He was in Arkansas and went through like foster adoption, everything. So then he came here to Nashville, and what was his next like logical path step? Even though it might not have all worked out how he wanted, what did he plan to do?
Go to college for in the medical field, because I guess he wanted to be in the dentist industry. So, yeah.
Right. At first, he was like, I went and studied cancer research at Vanderbilt, and then I was planning to, like you said, go to Meharry and study medical college dentistry. So that was the plan, right? And sometimes our logical plans, our logos don't work out how we envision, right? So he was like, since it didn't work out, I, wound up experiencing homelessness, had to sleep in my car, was trying to hide this. Think about even the logic that goes into that. Hiding to, like Jordan said, keep this strong, bold image of as a black man, like like showing this persona. Imagine having to do that on top of being homeless, on top of living in your car. Think about, and I don't know specifically when that photo was taken, but think about the photo of him in front of the Vanderbilt sign in his like white scrubs, right? Think about that. How we don't know, was he homeless then? Was he, where was he getting a shower? Where was he having food? Things like that. Think about the logos that would have to go into that, the survival to continue to show up, to look presentable, to continue to do what you're supposed to do, to still follow your goals and dreams and aspirations. Think about that. Think about the story we read the other day about the homeless college students, right? And they were having to do similar things, right? Not let people know they were homeless. They were talking about their curfew. They had like a 10 p.m. curfew. Does anybody remember what that was about in that story? Why did they have the curfew?
Yes.
Because they were at a shelter. Like,
Yeah, they were at a shelter. And I was talking about how I don't even know how I would have survived doing that, right? Because you have bad things that happen in your life. Like I was like robbed at gunpoint during college, and I had like a horrible breakup. I had like chicken pox so bad one time, my like almost senior year, they thought it was shingles. And you go through all of that and you're like even still pushing. But having a curfew because you live in a homeless shelter, like I remember when I was in Nashville, everything's so expensive anyway, right? So if you miss any work, you're like, I'm about to be broke. I'm about to have to be on this 18-cent ramen bag or whatever you can afford. And like, I would be teaching and then during the day, right? And then I would be going to my night classes at night. And then me and my friends would go to Panera and stay up all night long till like sometimes 12:31 before we got kicked out. But think if you had a curfew of 10 p.m., could you do any of that? Would that be sustainable? Like, it's just insane the things that people go through to like just survive. So now going back to his story, logically, we got the childhood trauma, we got survival mode with starvation. We finally make it all the way to his like pinnacle, right? When you think of success, like you graduate high school, you get into college, you're studying cancer research. He has the logical plan to go to Meharry to study dentistry. Then homelessness is one struggle, but what else is he going through at this time that's messing up his logos, his plan? What else did he say was going on when he moved here, other than homelessness?
His brother, sister, and uncle passed away.
Yeah, his brother's brother, the sister, the uncle, which was like his role model, right? The uncle. So like imagine as a child going through trauma and not knowing who you can trust at all, right? With family. And then when you have finally people you think are going to take care of you to foster you, they also doing something to you. And then you finally escape all of that. And the few people that you do still love and trust and hold as role models, then they also die. So then he was like, well, I can't continue like this, homeless in medical school, struggling. So then what did he decide? Logically, his next step was to continue on somewhat of the same path.
He became like a teacher.
Yeah, and he specific, very intentionally became what kind of teacher?
The K through 8.
Well,
To
yes.
dealing with like little kids growing up.
Okay, yeah, he's definitely worried about like helping people through their struggles, seeing, making sure he's representation for them, right? Seeing themselves through him. But more importantly, I think too, he's showing himself as a Black male in the STEM profession, right? So he was a science teacher and a math teacher. So he's like, maybe I didn't go about my goals, like I wasn't able to follow my logos exactly right as he had planned, but he still wants to make an impact in the community and show other people that they can survive through his story, plus still pursue that passion of science and math, and show them right with confidence that they can do that every single day, and especially because of his why, Ezel, right? So now I want you to, we've talked about ethos, we've talked about logos. Now I want you to think about pathos. And we've hit some of these kind of organically, but is there anything else that stuck out to you, either a quote he said or something that made you feel that emotion that we haven't maybe discussed?
That his old name is still like inside him, like all that. He's still going through that.
Right. That is powerful too. some people, right, they forget stuff on purpose. Not forget, but tone it out, right? Tune it out. Like, to cope, I need to forget this trauma that I endured, whether it's sexual, whether it's emotional, whether it's verbal, right? Whatever they're going through, but to not tune it out and use that further to propel yourself. Like Jordan said, having that always inside of himself, his name, and telling his story, right, as testimony. So what do you think about in terms of like his Professor X persona? Did anyone question that or wonder what that's about? Because he teaches K-8, but he did want to go to medical school, but he's not quite a doctor or professor yet. So what do you, he didn't talk about that in depth. So what do y'all think about that? Or did it make you wonder or question or have pathos? Okay, so he actually has a website, and I'm gonna share y'all his Instagram handle and stuff with y'all later. But he tells the students at the beginning when he meets them, which really helps build relationships, right? So they know they can trust him, just like how we try to do in this class. Like, I want to hear y'all's voice. I want you to know that I care about stuff. Because some people don't do that, right? They like hide everything, and then you're like, I don't feel comfortable sharing stuff with them. Or it's like they're entitled. Maybe they're trying to be over me with some power struggle, but he doesn't do that. He shows them, you can trust me. This is what I struggled through, encourages them the entire year. They know they can come to Professor X, but he calls himself Professor X. Like, obviously he has aspirations, right, of finishing one day, becoming a doctor, professor, hopefully. Told him he needs to do motivational speaking, but also as like a superhero. And he tells them that too. Like, do y'all know the X-Men character type persona, like Professor X? No, maybe. Okay, so it's like the white guy. He's in a wheelchair, if you know about like comic books or whatever. And I think he's like the professor over the school of the students that have all these abilities, right? The magical powers and
I know you're
superpowers and
talking
everything.
about.
Yeah. So that's what, even further, think of the logos that went in that. Like, he's literally already like pursuing science, teaching students, giving empathy all day, but then having like that superpower, Superman mindset to further give them confidence and have a mentor and be that mentor for them as Professor X, right? Both in real life as a tangible Black male professor or teacher, and with that idea of Professor X as the superhero who's training up other people with magical powers and things like that. So, okay. Any other things that brought out emotion, pathos from y'all? Remember, it can be joy, anger. It doesn't always have to be sadness. I know we're always talking about, frankly, depressing, angry topics in this class, but did anyone hear anything that he said about joy or intentionally doing certain things?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, I was saying, I know we talk about like anger and tragedy and sadness a lot in this class, but did anyone hear him discuss like the joy or intentionality or anything like that in his speech?
I think he was saying through all of that, through all your struggles and your hardships, that being positive will get you a long way and you can make good memories out of your bad
Right.
ones.
Right. And the other day we were both talking about that, about like going home sometimes is like a struggle. But then when you take out the negative and you're like, I'm not going to have these high expectations. Sometimes I'm just going to take the positive, right? Just the small moments. And sometimes if that's what you focus on, then you're not as critical or like depressed and angry as you might be if you're like hoping all these things for people that, you know, have disappointed you in the past. But if you have to go around like certain areas and stuff, and he was talking about how he always goes back to the professors and mentors and people he's met in his town in Arkansas and remembers like where he came from and who did help bring positivity and joy into his life. And then he tries to permeate and put that into actively our students and friends, family, stuff like that himself. Okay, so now we are going to switch gears. Thank you for fully enveloping and discussing everything about Ethos, Logos, Pathos with his speech. Now we're going to talk about our essay for the last portion. The next essay, again, why we've been honing in on this so much with Ethos, Logos, Pathos, talking about the poverty essay with the lady and her children, right? About everything she was going through and trying to logically think about her past and ethos. And then we talked about Viola Davis, right? And all of her struggles and what she does and propels herself. And then we talked about the college students, right, who are facing homelessness and those statistics and their stories. And now we've talked about Professor X's story. So now you might be like, this lady will not stop talking about ethos, logos, pathos. I'm done. But there's a reason, right? I'm strategically kind of making you think about it constantly and helping you pull out examples and making you do discussion boards, because you are about to, you did a snippet of it in your narrative essay, right? But now you're going to write an entire essay on ethos, logos, pathos. So I wanted you to have plenty of practice or plenty of examples to look back at, right? So that you're successful when you write yours. All right. So now